Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Five Star Zone. I'm your host, Rico Beard. Gonna wrap up the weekend that was in the Big Ten in week 10 for the Big Ten. And what you saw were the top two teams, or really the top three teams, kind of separating themselves. You saw Oregon go into Ann Arbor and they defeat the Wolverines. You saw Indiana spot Michigan State 10 points. And for the first time all season, Indiana was actually trailing. Don't worry about it because they scored 47 unanswered points. Spoiler alert. And you also saw Ohio State, Penn State. And you know what? It was wash, rinse, repeat. Tell me if you heard this before. Penn State just can't finish the job against the Buckeyes. And Ohio State wins on the road at Happy Valley. You also had some other pretty exciting games as well. Minnesota. Watch out for the Golden Gophers because all of a sudden Minnesota goes into Illinois and they win 25-17 in a comeback fashion. So shout out to the Gophers and Purdue in Northwestern in the battle of the basement. And of course, it went to overtime. Purdue chose not to kick three. Northwestern, almost very next play, scores a walk-off touchdown. They win 26 to 20. And yeah, Lincoln Riley in the Big Ten. I don't know if Lincoln Riley was ready for this because USC goes to Washington, which you got to think this is not new. You play Washington for many, many years in the Pac-12. Goal line. And they get to the USC gets to the goal line, cannot score. They run the ball, they get stuffed. Washington ends up winning the game. So shout out to the Huskies for getting that victory. And Iowa, just the Floyd of Rosedale it's theirs. Man, did they put their foot into Wisconsin 42-10. But I kind of want to break down three of the games. Ohio State goes into Happy Valley, and this was a game where unfortunately Penn State James Franklin's got a lot to answer for his fan base because, and not just the fan that yelled at him after the game, but I mean, how come you cannot beat the Buckeyes? You've seen coaches that are great coaches that win a lot of games, but that's the bugaboo that gets them fired. I'm looking at John Cooper at Ohio State, could not beat Michigan. That was going to be the calling card for him as he had, other than that, great seasons, but because you couldn't beat Michigan, that was the reason why most Buckeye fans turned their backs on him. I got a feeling the same is going to be with James Franklin. Now, the only good thing about this is Penn State can still make the college football playoffs. Probably the best thing in the world that happened to Penn State was they lost that game, so they're going to be nowhere near the Big Ten title game, which means you don't have to play another top five team because, let's face it, you suck against top five teams. So you may actually backdoor your way into the playoffs thanks to this loss. So it's not as bad as it looks if you're a Nittany Lion fan because you're going to have an opportunity to play in the college football playoff. When the polls come out later on this week, I fully expect to see Penn State's name in there. If you're Ohio State, look, Penn State scored their only touchdown off of a pick six. Will Howard is still not – I'm not ingrained to him yet. This Ohio State team still seems to be a little broken. They're not the same Ohio State team that I'm used to seeing. The offensive line, look, I know it's patchwork, but it's Ohio State. You're supposed to be next man up. You're not. The defensive line is not what it used to be. Tons of skill position players, but I look at this Buckeye team and you're winning games, but I got to think that if you're a Buckeye fan, your level of confidence is just not there, that they can go out there and really do something. If you face Oregon again in the Big Ten championship game, I don't think you beat Oregon for the second time. So just my thoughts. Ann Arbor, Oregon. Speaking of Oregon, Oregon goes into Ann Arbor, and apparently Lanning must be really big, or he's got some family members that are really big into some certain aspects of things that happen in Vegas, because Oregon scored a meaningless touchdown late in the game with about 30 seconds to go. Except for it was a touchdown that made sure that Oregon covered the spread. Oregon ends up winning 38-17, but it wasn't as easy as it seemed. Michigan had their chances. Michigan had their shots. The first touchdown, it was controversial whether that was a touchdown or not by Oregon. But Oregon, never really they were never out of control of this game. Don't get me wrong. They were always in control, but Michigan made it competitive, and Michigan could have had some chances to really do better. The problem I have with Michigan was I understand the two quarterback system, but you should only use that when you have to. When Davis Warren is actually dealing out there, when Davis Warren is actually moving the ball, don't take him out the game, Sharon. Leave him in the game. I talk about it was the drive that Michigan ended up, I think it was late in the first half. Michigan ends up kicking a field goal. But Davis Warren is making play after play, hitting lovely. Like they're moving the ball. And then you stop all your momentum and you bring Alex Orji in the game. And then you have to end up kicking a field goal. And then it's like late in the game when you're alternating Orji, Davis, Orji, Davis. Like, no. Pick a quarterback. Two quarterback systems should only be done if you're hurting, if you're desperate, or I can even see if you're in the red zone. But when you're back on your own 10-yard line, you put Alex Orji in the game, everybody in the big house, everybody on the Oregon sideline, everybody in their mama knows he's not throwing the ball, period. You shot yourself in the foot. A lot of just mental errors when it was Sharon Moore. The challenge of the Colston Loveland catch, it wasn't a catch. That's what your assistants are there for. Michigan wasn't as bad as I thought they were going to be in this game. I thought Oregon was just going to take it to them. They didn't. Oregon ends up covering because of a last-second touchdown with James scoring. But they were, like I said, if you watch the game, Oregon was always in control. Dylan Gabriel, to me, is going to be your Heisman Trophy winner. At least he's the leader in the clubhouse right now. Cool, calm, collective. He just understands the assignment. He knows how to get the ball around. He loses Tez Johnson early in the game, and that's okay because he just finds new receiver. He loses number one receiver, and because of that, he's also the punt returner. They fumble the punt. Michigan takes advantage of it, and before you know it, boom, it's 7-7. But Oregon never panicked, and that's why Oregon is the number one team right now. Speaking of never panicked, Indiana, for the very first time, Kirk Cignetti and the Hoosiers were down. Michigan State did what Michigan State normally do. They come out in that first drive, and they look dominant. They come out in the first drive, and they kick a field goal. They don't score a touchdown. But then in the next drive, hit Nick Marsh for a touchdown. Spectacular play by the freshman. They're up 10-0. But then there's a disconnect because after the first two drives from Michigan State, they struggled to score points. So much so that was it. It was 10-0. If you were a Michigan State fan, you should have took a photo of the scoreboard because that was it. You were done after that. 47 unanswered points for the Indiana Hoosiers. Rourke throws for 4 touchdowns. And Indiana, speaking of never panic, man, Indiana just enforced their will. Cignetti just kept pounding the ball, throwing the ball around. The little wide receiver bubble screen worked, and they didn't stop it. For Michigan State, you were throwing the ball, and you were quarterback. You had your quarterback running the ball early in the game, and you stopped it. You took yourself out, and you said, hey, we're going to run the ball. Well, funny thing about that, you ended up finishing the game with negative rushing yards. You could not run the ball. Aiden Childs gets injured in the game. He hurts his wrist. We got to find out. Good thing for Michigan State, you're in a bye week. It gives them a chance to heal up and get ready for the game against Illinois. But that, I guess, if you're a Spartan fan, it was disheartening because when you look at it, when you lose to Oregon, you say, well, they got a bunch of 5-star players. They got a senior quarterback. They got all of this stuff. You lose to Ohio State, same thing, coaching, quarterback system, players, 5 stars. When you get beat that badly by Indiana, what you have to do is you have to take a serious look in the mirror. If you're Jonathan Smith, if you're that staff, if you're the Spartan team, and even the fans, Kirk Cignetti came in at the same time as Jonathan Smith. Kirk Cignetti brought in a bunch of transfers from James Madison. Smith brought a bunch in from Oregon State. Cignetti's guys were ready to play. He went after the transfer. He went after senior transfers. Smith went after transfers that are going to be here for a while. Now, why do I say that? Because you're hoping that those transfers stick and they become a better team next year. But, man, Cignetti is called lightning in a bottle. You can't say that, oh, well, they had a ton of 5-star players because that's Indiana. You can't even say, oh, well, look at the NIL program that Ohio State and Oregon has. Indiana football does not have an NIL program. Indiana football just beats you. Indiana football is what you, I hate to say it, if you're a Spartan fan, it's what you hope to be, because Indiana football, in my opinion, Indiana's going to be playing Oregon in the Big Ten title game. Indiana is probably the second best team in this conference. And I think if Indiana play Oregon, it will be a game a lot closer. The only problem with Indiana is the logo on their helmet and the crimson and cream colors. If Indiana was USC, they would be the number 2 team in the country, or even number 1. People would be lauding and praising them, saying how great they are, but they're Indiana, so we find every excuse to say, well, they're Indiana. The Hoosiers are legit, people. I've been telling you this for a while, and I'm going to keep telling you. They get to play and they get to host Michigan this weekend. I expect to see the same thing. There is no quit in that team. And why I say no quit? Because up 40 to 10. Starters still in the game. They run a little trickeration and they score another touchdown. Cignetti doesn't know what it means to lay off. Like, you saw Oregon kind of pace themselves near the end. They scored a meaningless touchdown, but there was no sense of urgency. There was still a sense of urgency with Indiana the entire game, even though they are just killing the Spartans, even though they rushed the punt because they knew, hey, you got a new long snapper, and chances are he's going to make a mistake. They smelled blood in the water, and they went into full attack mode, and their attack mode ends when the clock hits 000. I like what this Indiana team is bringing. If you're MSU, I don't know if it's the perfect time for a bye week or a bad time for the bye week, because you have to now sit and watch this embarrassment that was 47 unanswered points at home. Your quarterback is down. The team's body language was just not there. Indiana came in, punched Indiana in the mouth. And Indiana was like the guy in the movie that the blood came trickling down. They took it, looked at it, licked it, and started smiling and said, yeah. That's when you know you're in a real fight. Indiana then turned around, punched Michigan State. Michigan State wanted nothing to do with that battle. They were cooked. They were done. There was no alternate game plans. There was no, okay, well, if they do this, we do that. For MSU, their best 2 drives are their first 2 drives, and rarely do they do anything other than that. I guess if you look at it, the Maryland game, they found a way to rally and come back. And then against Iowa, they scored a bunch of points. But if you take away those 2 games, MSU doesn't score over 20 points. I mean, okay, fine. I'm not counting Prairie View because, let's face it, that was an open scrimmage, in my opinion. So I'm taking that off the books. So don't write me about that. But in the other games that really mattered, Michigan State's offense cannot score over 20 points. That's problematic. Even in the Iowa game, you kicked 6 field goals. You scored 32 points. 18 of those points, you made more points off of field goals than you actually did touchdowns. You scored 2 touchdowns, 6 field goals. They got to find a way to score points. And to me, look, the hardest part of your schedule, if you're a Spartan fan, is over. You now have 2 winnable games and 1 game that I still think is a flip of a coin, going to Illinois, because Illinois is kind of struggling as well. They're going to be on a bye. You want to make a statement. You win your last 3 games. You finish the season 7-5, and I think you can stomach this stretch of the season where you had Oregon, where you had Ohio State, where you had Iowa, where you had Michigan, you had Indiana. You won 1 of those 5 games. You could have possibly won 2 of them, but you squandered the Michigan game. You got to finish strong, and I think Spartan fans will be okay with it. They don't like it because when you see your neighbor who's in the same situation as you in Indiana, and they're dominating, and they're probably going to go to the playoffs, and you're still struggling to score points, it's problematic. Got to fix the offense. Got to get aggressive on defense, because once again, you can't put pressure on the quarterback. I'm hoping this is a long game. I'm hoping this is a long solution for MSU, because in the short term, doesn't look good. Anyway, we'll be back later on this week to preview Week 11 in the Big Ten. Indiana, Michigan, that's probably going to be the headliner game. Going to talk about that and a lot more later on. But thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. Keep telling your friends about the 5-Star Zone. I'm your host, Rico Beard.